Where else are you establishing or working with private cities?
Yeah, so outside of Honduras, what we've been able to do is more limited. I mean, we've got some partnerships with some intentional communities. So one that I'd name is called Liberstad in Norway, which is an intentional community that's being set up there. It doesn't have any kind of legal independence, but it's a place where people are coming together with a kind of libertarian mindset in order to establish a community. And that's a small project with a few dozen people again, but that's an example of one nearer to Europe.
What can an intentional community do without having any control over setting laws? Because the majority of the framework for libertarian ideas comes from the idea with regards to the size of the state and legal framework. So if you're not able to affect or have your own set of laws, what can you actually do?
So there's a bit you can do. You can trade internally in a way that's not utilizing the banking system, and there are different rules around trade, around taxation, around what needs to be reported in terms of accounting and things like that.
Why though? Because if you're evading local tax laws, then you're
not evading them. So there's different rules in lots of places, but also in Norway regarding what you can do if you're just trading internally as a community. So this particular, if you're not using fiat currency when you're trading, you're just using some other tokens. This particular project has a stable coin that they use in order to conduct local trade.
And they need Fedimint.
Yeah.
Do you know about Fedimint?
A little bit, yeah. I was talking to Obi yesterday actually, and it came up in the discussion I had.
That sounds perfect for them.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a way that you can. Yeah, this is the project. It's a way that you can. If you're someone that doesn't like to have to do a lot of reporting for all your activities to the government, then you can join a community like this, and you can do it through their individual stablecoin. And then the way that it works internally is that only the company itself does like the reporting and buying of things on behalf of the community.
Right.
And then that sort of streamlines and simplifies the whole process.
What you guys really want, though, you really want a large, successful private city, 10,000, 100,000, even 1 million people. That must be the goal, to prove this works at scale. I think even somebody like myself who's interested or skeptical wants to see it work.
Sure.
And wants to see how it works. And wants to see that option. I love that thing where Balaji talks about vote with your feet rather than with your ballot. It's much more effective. What are the biggest hurdles to get into that point? Is it that the state just has such a stranglehold and something like this is such a threat to them and nobody ever wants to allow this?
Well, in part it's convincing people that this is a good thing to do, and in part it's finding the right areas where you can buy land and you can expand, and it takes time. I've mentioned projects in Honduras, and I mentioned other projects like Liberstad we have partnerships with. But we're also working on a new project in West Africa, which hopefully we'll be able to announce in 2 to 3 months. And this is somewhere where we are aiming for that like 10,000 kind of figure eventually.
So how much can you tell us about that without announcing it?
Not a great deal, other than if all goes to plan, then that will allow an even higher degree of autonomy than what's been possible in Honduras.
Right.
So if people want to learn about that, we'll be making some announcements about it at Liberty in Our Lifetime in October.
It's not the one with that rapper, is it?
Sorry?
It's not the one with that rapper.
Raycon.
Yeah.
It's not, no.
Thank God.
It's not
Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Why would any of these countries allow you to do this? Do they get paid from the city?
So we ideally try and create a win-win situation for the government. So the government in Honduras, there is a percentage. There's like a profit sharing deal for the company that comes and sets the development up. So a percentage of the profits, something like 12% from the Honduran projects goes to the government. But also the same reason that countries allow the establishment of special economic zones, because it brings in investment, it creates a preferable environment that's more competitive internationally. So people come in, they invest, they build things, that creates jobs for people who are in the surrounding areas. So there's lots of reasons why people establish special zones, and these zones just go slightly further in terms of their autonomy. And that's the case we always try and make. This is a genuinely beneficial thing for the government, because we believe that it is a symbiotic kind of relationship, that if you establish a special zone, then it does genuinely help the host government, because if you look at we're talking about China at the beginning of the show, if you look at what's happened to the area surrounding Hong Kong, like Shenzhen is now the wealthiest like per capita place in China in part because of its relationship with Hong Kong and the fact that it sits just across the border. Because when you have these really wealthy and successful areas, then that creates more opportunities for people in the geographical proximity. So we make that kind of case to governments when we're talking to them about establishing special zones.
And I guess you're taking some of their responsibility away from managing areas and paying them for it. You're paying them to operate an area for all of them. It's there's like a strong logic to it, but at the same time, you're making an argument for government to not exist. You're basically having to tell them there's no reason for you to exist without telling them that, but telling them enough to convince them to do it.
Well,
yeah.
If you want to get into a really philosophical case for it, some people you could make that argument. What we're saying really is that you don't have to go as far as we might do individually in terms of your view on politics and whether you think that you want to go to a full anarcho-capitalist kind of society or whether you think something like that's more libertarian but further away from that and more close to what today's society might be is the better option. You don't really have to take a position on that, because in practical terms, what we're suggesting is that the zones are just granted a high degree of autonomy, and we make the case for having good legal frameworks, for having better incentives for the zones that are established, such that the people that are running the zones have a direct incentive to make them succeed. They're not rewarded for decisions that boost activity in the short term but might be bad for the long term. So we make the case to governments that this is a good thing, and we point to examples of city-states like Monaco, Singapore, Hong Kong, Liechtenstein, and the kind of wealth belts that have been generated around them.
Are those particular territories successful, though, because they're able to establish themselves as zero tax or low tax regions in areas where people want to avoid tax, and therefore it brings in the wealthy into those regions and they become successful because of that?
I don't think that's really the right way to look at it.
But I think it's an important lens to look. So if Monaco, zero tax.
Well, zero income tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's great for Formula One drivers.
Yeah, Monaco has most of its tax is raised through VAT, and it has a system whereby it strangely, like, people think about it as like an offshore financial place, but there's really not much of a finance industry there. It's
a holiday zone, and it's good for wealthy people. I'm not criticizing. I'm trying. Liechtenstein, what's the tax rate there?
Off the top, I'm not entirely sure the tax rate, but the examples I'm more familiar with would be like Hong Kong, Singapore.
Yeah.
And if you look at those examples, I mean, people turned up in their millions to Hong Kong during the Cultural Revolution with nothing. There was people fleeing the Vietnam War that were able to find refuge in Hong Kong. But the history of this region is that loads of people turned up, started from absolutely nothing, arrived with just the clothes that they had and a suitcase, and it's turned into a place that is wealthier in per capita terms than the UK is. And it took about 4 to 5 decades for that to happen.
Why is that as well?
Why is that?
Yeah, why do you think, why was Hong Kong so successful?
I think it was because in the post-war years, they established a very minimal government regime where there was between 9 and 12% government expenditure as a proportion of overall GDP. And that compared to, say, 40+% in the UK. So the government in Hong Kong was much, much leaner than the UK government, because it had some government officials. There was one who was the chief financial officer called Sir John Cobblethwaite, who had some more libertarian ideas. And through that, he kept the government really lean and small and just established clear property rights, which is what we advocate for at the Free Cities Foundation. And through that happening, the Hong Kong's economy really succeeded in a short period of time. And I think the most impactful story for me is just the huge amount of people that I know were able to escape from what happened in mainland China and dramatically improve their lives as a result of it. So
until recently, sadly.
Until recently, but even now, it's still. I think the changes that have happened in Hong Kong relate to politics and media. And even now, you can still do business there with a relative degree of freedom. I am definitely concerned with what's happened in Hong Kong, but I think there's a lot to be learned from the overall story of how it succeeded in terms of how they kept the government lean and how they kept private property rights strong.
It reminds me a little bit of that tweet we saw yesterday as well from the guy who was the president of Estonia in terms of fixing their country. Yes. And as see if you can dig that out, because I just think that's an interesting analogy. But I guess what you're saying is the more limited government is, the more opportunity there is for people to flourish. I'm not somebody who's ever been convinced by the idea of no government. But I think there needs to be some kind of government, but hopefully limited, as small as possible. My worry about no government and purely private is what's now happening in Singapore, which has essentially gone very authoritarian, which is always the risk of having a fully private kind of jurisdictional area. What's your kind of like interpretation of what's happened there?
So the difference between, say, Singapore and what we would advocate, so there are various models. The core model that we advocate is the free private cities model, which is a conception of Titus Gable. And within this model, the way that the relationship between citizens and the people that operate cities, we call them city operators, works, is that there is a real contract that is signed between each citizen and each operator. And within this contract, you specify all of the rules that the city has, and they mainly revolve around protecting the rights of other people and respecting the rights of other people, respecting their privacy, their ability to do business in a way that they deem suitable as long as they're not harming other people. And then within that, you also have a set of obligations in terms of what fees need to be paid for the basic services. So that's one model that hasn't been fully trialed yet, but we think that there's a strong case to be made for it. And the difference between that and Singapore is that in Singapore, you still have a government which is ultimately in charge of setting law, running the legislature, running the executive. So within our system, if there isn't a provision to say, if it doesn't say in the case of X, Y, and Z, you can lock down an entire population, keep them in their homes, then there's no legal basis for a free private city to be able to do that. Whereas in any other kind of society, the government just needs to get Parliament to agree that this is the right course of action, and it can be done.
If one of these projects was successful enough, though, it could be one that eventually was completely autonomous from a state, which would be super cool and interesting to see. I mean, it's almost like, why don't you just find an island and establish your own free country?
The thing with doing that is that all of the land on the world is currently occupied by nation states. So there's no free land left. So wherever you go, you're going to have to work with the government, unless you're part of the seasteading movement. That's the one exception. So
talk to me about that.
Yeah. So the seasteading movement is designed to try and establish new societies on sea.
Do you remember the Freedomship?
The Freedomship, I do. Yeah.
Have you seen the Freedomship?
No.
I followed this for a while, and the project ended up dying. I was like, is this real? Are they really going to do this? I don't know if it's still live, but it was a project. The idea was build this entire city on a ship. So if you go into the images, and I was like,
yeah, some of the people involved with seasteading were involved in this ship.
I mean, look at that fourth picture, Danny. It's like an airport on top, and can you get to
I want to read about it.
Right. So the Freedomship. I mean, this is I was probably before my kids were born when I first read about this, a long time ago. So Freedomship is a floating city project. Yeah, initially proposed in the late 90s. It was named so because of the free international lifestyle facilitated by a mobile ocean colony. The project would not be a conventional ship, but a series of linked barges. So this one was an integrated city, 1,800 meters long, with a housing for 80,000 people, a hospital, school system, hotel, casino, commercial, office, occupancy, duty-free shop. Like, it's people. You've got to go online and search for the Freedomship and see this. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it just think of a cruise ship and then like 20 exit. That's what it is, and that's because in international waters.
In international waters, there's no government that has full.
Go back to the pictures though, Danny. I just want to see some of those pictures because they are kind of. I think there's also videos you can actually see for them, but they actually did like the flybys, and I was fascinated by this project just because of the idea of look at that airport. It's literally an airport on top of the ship. You can see this. Yeah, it's unbelievable. But the one thing I thought about with this was, you seen the film Snowpiercer?
I've not.
Is
no.
it Snowpiercer with the train?
Don't know.
Like, I wonder how it creates the haves and the have-nots within the city, and have the kind of like weird kind of zones of like, the rich and the poor. I think sometimes these things are kind of like designed idealistically.
Well, if you want to see what the current seasteaders are mainly doing, there's a company called Ocean Builders based in Panama.
Let's have a look, Danny.
And they are building individual pods for people to establish at sea. They use
Individual
similar
pods?
technology. So like family-sized homes, basically on sticks, a bit like
And can you
oil
connect them
rigs.
so you can become like a community?
That's what they aim to do. Yeah.
Holy shit, this
so
is
two
cool.
of these are going up this summer.
Wow, this is
off
fucking cool.
Panama, yeah.
Oh my God, that's so cool. It's like something from the future.
So these are going from about 400,000 US.
How
each.
far out to sea do you have to be?
They're actually starting doing these within Panamanian territory, but then you have to go out, I think it's a couple of dozen nautical miles until you're actually in international waters.
Okay. And then once you're out there and you're in your home, hold on, but you're just kind of stuck in a little pod.
You would be.
What can you do?
You would be, but there are ways that you can. You could go out there. You could fish. You could enjoy your home. That these, I mean, people can't see here, but these are quite spacious pods.
Yeah.
They've got.
Hold on, are we this is like WF stuff. Are we going to be eating bugs in these as well?
You just eat fish.
Who fish? Okay, so why would you do this? Firstly, do you avoid any tax because you're in international waters?
Yeah.
Can anyone stop you? Can anyone anywhere go and build what they want out in the middle of the ocean?
Well, they could do. They could do technically. There's not any law. There's something called the law of the sea, which is an international kind of set of rules that tend to be recognized by states. But if you were to go and conduct some economic activity out in the sea in international waters, then no individual state would have jurisdiction over you.